If you haven't heard, I recently started a podcast with Dan No Skill, Mr. V's Garage, Mr. Pulse, and Formula Duck, where every week we talk about Formula One. And a lot of other things too, like Formula Duck nearly failing English because of sim racing, Mr. V putting all the current drivers on a plane, and Dan being crashed into in a little car park. For explanations on all of that and more, head over to the Crash Happy podcast and make sure you subscribe. So how exactly have we found ourselves here with 6 races to go in the 2025 Formula One season, a title battle between teammates still yet to play out after years of dominance from Verstappen, and yet people are complaining that this year's title is even less exciting than last year's frankly overhyped championship battle between two drivers who were never even within 40 points of one another in the second half of the season? Well, the answer for many F1 fans is the fact that the McLaren team just cannot seem to decide if they want to let their drivers battle out on track or not, and that they're possibly treating their drivers unfairly, with Lando getting favoritism over Oscar more often than the other. So I wanted to see if that was actually true. Of course, the example that everyone points to is Monza, where Norris was given the choice of strategy and allowed Oscar to pit first as long as there was no chance of an undercut. Norris had enough of a gap, so the team boxes Piastri first, he's in and out without a problem, and then Lando stops 1 lap later, only for the front left tyre to be slow going on, resulting in a 6-second stop for Lando Norris and an opportunity for Piastri to move ahead of his teammate. This is where the team steps in, ordering Piastri to give the position back to Lando, as he had been ahead all race and the pit stop was the team's fault, not Lando's fault. Which, as you can imagine, then opened the floodgates for both Piastri fans and Norris fans and general McLaren fans to go into a spin, head into that hole of despair that we finally thought we were out of, now that we have a championship winning car and no longer have Honda power units. But I do want to point out that even in Australia, round 1 of the season, where there was no telling who would be wearing the championship in 7 months' time, when Oscar was catching the back of Lando Norris for P2, he was told to maintain position until the cars had passed the back markers, and by that time Oscar's pace advantage is gone and he was unable to go for a move that a few laps earlier he could have maybe raced for. Now, I appreciate that there are a few maybes in that, and at that point in the year the team was also unaware that it was going to go on and absolutely dominate the Constructors' Championship, winning it with 6 races still to run. So they were probably thinking about consolidating their points rather than risking a collision between the two teammates in very difficult conditions. There were still drivers spinning off at various parts of the track, and Oscar makes his own mistake later in the Grand Prix due to the track still being slippery. But it goes to show that the McLaren team have had a say in what both of their drivers do throughout the entire season. This is not a recent thing. The McLaren team continues to say over and over that their drivers are allowed to go racing, and I think that they do allow that, but only if the race is playing out in a way where they have everything under control and they've deemed it to be fair. I'll give you a few examples. Towards the end of the race in Japan, Oscar was catching the back of Lando Norris again for P2, but Norris was also nearing the back of Verstappen for the lead of the race. So when Oscar came on the radio and asked to swap positions with his teammate, thinking that he would have more pace and be able to catch Verstappen ahead, the team told him that he would have to race for position. I think knowing that nothing was likely to happen, as it was really difficult to overtake. Then there was the safety car restart in Imola, when Norris was on the fresher tyres of the two McLarens. Lando was again allowed to race and overtake Oscar, but I think only because the team thought that they would have no chance of catching Max anyway, so the win was already out of the question, and there was also no chance of an attack from the pack behind, so it was just those two cars in a very particular part of the race, which is reminiscent of Canada, where Lando was quicker and catching the back of Piastri, who was struggling to get past Antonelli for the podium places at that time. So Lando asked the team on the radio to swap positions, to which he was told, no, if you want that position, you'll have to race for it. It was just then Lando's fault that he didn't race for it very well, making a mistake and crashing into the back of Oscar's car, taking himself out of the Grand Prix. Again, though, I think that the McLaren team could see that their cars were going to finish in 4th and 5th place regardless of if Lando Norris got past his teammate or not, as the Mercedes cars were just having one of those races where they have a rocket ship of a car under very specific circumstances, like they do a few times a year. So there was no downside of letting the two cars race at that particular moment in terms of Constructors' Championship points. other than Lando smashing into his teammate, but you'd never expect one of your drivers to make an error in that way, which bled into Austria as we saw the two McLaren cars allowed to race for the lead. To an extent, I would say. The McLaren cars were way faster than the rest of the field for the whole weekend. I mean, the pair finished almost 20 seconds ahead of third place Charles Leclerc and over a minute ahead of fifth place George Russell. So to say that they were dominant that weekend is an understatement, meaning the team could afford to let their cars battle as they would be finishing first and second regardless of what else happened, unless they collided. And in the wake of Canada, that was definitely on the team's mind, as a few laps in, Piastri gets a talking to over the radio after the McLaren pair have a few close calls going into turn 3, but a big lockup from Oscar Piastri into turn 4, which put an end to that battle. But the reason I bring it up is because once more, they were allowed to race one another up until the circumstances didn't suit McLaren. I know some people would then bring up Silverstone and the Piastri penalty that he got behind the safety car, but I actually think that's very different to anything else we're going to talk about in this video, because that was an Oscar Piastri mistake and therefore something that I think he has to live with, and the team were right to not let Oscar pass Lando in that scenario, in my opinion. Then in Belgium, we saw both drivers allowed to race once again, with Oscar leading very early on and then Lando chasing towards the end of the race. But the McLaren pair had a pit stop advantage over the rest of the field, and there was nothing to lose from McLaren's perspective. The only reason we didn't see a battle was due to Lando's mistakes, which we'll talk about more in a second. Let's just finish up the other incidents between the two McLaren drivers first. In Hungary, Piastri was probably the quicker of the two drivers, but Norris went onto a different strategy, which was just a gamble that paid off. I remember a few people murmuring that this was favoritism and something that they shouldn't really do. I know Nico Rosberg talked about his time at Mercedes and the fact that they shouldn't split the strategies, but I think Lando just got lucky here, as the majority of the grid went for the two-stop strategy and the majority of the grid were wrong. It's just a shame that Piastri was in that bunch. We touched upon Monza at the start, and although you could see it as not letting the drivers race one another, the reason they didn't let them race is because the slow stop that allowed Piastri through in the first place, again, wasn't part of McLaren's plans, and it was so difficult to overtake at Monza, we wouldn't have seen a battle between them anyway. And in Singapore, we see the cars side by side into turn 1, where McLaren can't really get involved. There's no strategy or discussion to Lando getting a better launch and darting up the inside of his teammate. Was it a little bit reckless? Maybe a little bit clumsy, making contact with both Max and Oscar? Maybe, but Lando also knew it was his only opportunity that he was going to get for the entire race, and I think Oscar's radio messages after that, where he criticizes the team and the FIA for not getting involved, were mainly because he also knew that there was no chance he was getting back past his teammate without any kind of assistance. So looking at every incident where the McLaren pair have been close to one another out on track and seeing how the team have reacted in each of those circumstances, I think they've been fairly consistent. Not to say that they've been good or have allowed the most entertaining thing to happen, but I don't think there's been any favoritism in terms of racing at McLaren. I think they just only allow their drivers to do certain things under very strict circumstances. I actually think the real reason that this championship has lacked drama and intrigue is because, well, whilst the team have been pretty incompetent at dealing with having two drivers at a very similar level in a championship winning car, I blame the drivers more than the team. Both of the McLaren drivers haven't really managed to have a brilliant weekend at the same time as each other. I mean, at the start of the year when Oscar was picking up wins, Lando was struggling to get into a rhythm in qualifying and making a lot of mistakes. Even at this point in the year, there have been many qualifyings where we've been left wondering why Lando isn't starting from higher up on the grid. I mean, Max Verstappen has more pole positions than anyone this season in a Red Bull car that he has complained about constantly. But back to the point, Oscar wins in Miami. Lando was pretty unlucky at the start, battling with Max, runs out of road and drops down the order. In Monaco, when Lando was at his best, Oscar had an off weekend. Canada, Lando makes a mistake. Great Britain, we see Oscar make a mistake. Belgium, we see Lando make a mistake. Lando's engine then explodes in the Netherlands. Like, both of them are then terrible in Baku. You get my point. They never really coincide with both having a good weekend at the same time. Maybe Austria is the one example of that. We have to face it that the championship this year isn't between the two best drivers. It's between the two drivers that happen to be in the best car. One of the reasons I would say that 2021 was so good wasn't just because the championship was close, it's that Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen were by far and away the best drivers on the grid that season, and it's just not the same with Norris and Piastri. I think they're both tremendous drivers, but the top two this year have been Verstappen and Russell. Them nabbing wins and getting amongst the McLarens means it hasn't been a straight title fight for the papaya team. I mean, the discussion recently was if Max can get back into the championship battle despite being 97 points behind Oscar during the summer break. Surely we should be talking about the two McLarens fighting for the title and not Max and his chances of getting back into it. But with 6 races to go and the Constructors' Championship finally in the hands of McLaren officially, now more than ever, both McLaren drivers, Oscar and more so Lando, need to step up and show that they can make this championship properly entertaining. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you agree with me on the McLaren drivers and the situation between the two? Who do you think will win the championship? I'll be covering it all, not only on this channel, but also on Crash Happy with Dan No Skill, Mr. V, Mr. Pols, and Formula Duck. So subscribe here and also subscribe over there. Thank you so much to the channel members. And whilst we're here, why not check out this video where I look at who might be on the 2026 Formula 1 grid.